but traveling is really important to me. And I identified as a traveler, as an explorer, as somebody who really went out and did that kind of thing. And I think that for a lot of people, we get that beaten out of us, and it's really sad. And it makes me really, I guess in some ways it makes everybody who kind of does this feel a little bit like a rebel.
Hey, welcome to the Ronin Mindset. My name is Steve Didier, and today get your passport ready, kiddos, because we are going to have some fun. Our guest today has some really, really unique stories, and she's a business coach and a bunch of other things, but she isn't really just a coach. She is your secret weapon for showing up like a total boss, armed with clarity, competence, and confidence. As the creator of Boom Biz, Be Legit, and Wonder Leader coaching programs, she's the go-to success coach for everyone from CEOs to nonprofit powerhouses and small business owners who are ready to level up. Cassa knows how to take you from feeling meh to magnetic. With her signature coaching program, she helps you outsmart imposter syndrome, command the room, and feel damn good about how you spend your time. And you'll get to hear some crazy stories about traveling the globe and working in Antarctica along the way. Yes, she's done that too. Welcome to the show, Cassa Grant. How you doing?
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Steve. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, I've been excited for this one. You don't get to talk to too many people who have been to Antarctica,
And too many
much
who
less
have been,
spent a significant
yeah,
amount
I
of
was going
time
to say, and
there.
crazy enough to spend a lot of time down there.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So I can't wait to hear about that. But before we get to that, give us a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you're at now, how you got there, what path you took.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, it's really funny because when we were talking about getting ready for the episode and you were talking about people who want to go do stuff, that was always me, right? So I grew up on a ranch in Montana, rural, very rural, about 100 miles from any other town in southeastern Montana. And I always wanted to travel, like always was obsessed with the idea of traveling, and just couldn't wait to make it happen for myself. So when I finished college in particular, I decided to become an adventure travel bus driver with
Oh,
this company
wow.
called the Green Tortoise, which is an outstanding company that I always still recommend to people. But basically, we were driving like 40-foot coaches all through the US and Mexico and Canada. And I quit a steady teaching job, a very stable teaching job as a high school English teacher, and went and did that. And that was a really challenging thing. You know, a lot of people are going, "Oh, you're giving up this really great job," which, I mean, I'm not saying it's not a great job, but there's a lot of teaching jobs out there, right? So it was an extraordinary experience. And then, so I did that on and off for quite a few years. I actually did decide to go back to grad school. And then that's when Antarctica kind of popped up. One of my other fellow Green Tortoise drivers had been going down there for years. And he was like, "You would love it. You've got to go." And so I was finishing grad school and I was kind of like, well, I don't really have anything better to do, which is terrible. I know. I was getting more excited about it at that point too, because he had told me a lot of great things about it. And started going down on and off for about 5 years. I spent about 3.5 years down there total, 3 winters and 3 summers. Yeah. And yeah, it was full on. It's like, it's one of those situations like a lot of travel where it can be a lot of like boring, 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 exciting, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly there. It definitely has that mystique and that person, that kind of vibe around it. But there's also just, I mean, it's like working in an industrial town, maybe in Alaska or somewhere like that too. Actually, I would say it's probably fairly
Yeah.
similar to what the roles that I was doing. And yeah, and then I moved to New Zealand. My partner down there, he's a Kiwi, and he has. It was easier for us to be in New Zealand. Also, I love New Zealand, so it made a lot of sense for us to do that. And that's when I started my business. I was kind of like, what are people doing? They're making money online. I don't know what they're doing, but I bet I could figure something out, right? So that's been
Right.
about, coming up on 8 years now, actually, since I started my business. So it's wonderful. And I actually think that business is such an amazing adventure too. And I know that sounds so dorky because it is, but
No, not at
uh,
all. It's
it,
amazing.
I mean, travel still excites me, and I think it always will, but actually business has really gotten really high in that estimation as well. So it's been fun to explore that way too.
That's awesome. You and I have some similar beginnings because I grew up in very, very rural Minnesota.
Oh, cool. Yes. You
and
betcha.
always dreamed of traveling and dreamed, like when I was a kid, I would watch we didn't have a TV for most of my childhood, but when I would go over to my grandma's house, watch TV, and I'd watch those old shows like Hawaii Five-O and Fantasy Island, and I would just be like, wow, white sand beaches, palm trees, and
Yeah.
that's all I wanted. And we didn't, my family, we didn't travel that much. I mean, we spent a lot of time together. We did camping. We stayed kind of local, but we never did any real traveling. It's kind of
Mm.
tough. I was the oldest of five kids, and that I could see that'd be incredibly tough. But yeah,
Yeah.
I can't. When I was 17, I'm like, I'm going somewhere. So
Well, and that's for me too. I mean, we were broke. So like, yeah, exactly. Same thing. Like we would do some camping, that kind of thing, but we didn't have a lot of money. And so that was the other thing where travel was always a very different, I was always thinking about it in a different way because I knew I had to support myself because, nobody was going to pay for me. So I was always looking for roles that would, help me be able to, I mean, like I moved to Europe for about a year within the tortoise driving and before grad school. And I was living in Prague, which was really great. And I went there to teach English as a foreign language because I thought, oh, well, that's the way you can, make a living over there. And then I
right,
actually ended up being an au pair instead because, I had a lot of experience with little kids. Like I was a preschool teacher in college. So, just thinking about, well, how can I transfer these skills in this new place? I think it used to be harder because we didn't have the option of just taking our computer and that's how we transfer our skills, right? So
right.
I think that's just, it's almost overwhelming because there's so much opportunity, but it's also so freeing because it's not like you don't have to take the routes that you did even this is probably 20 years ago.
Right.
Like, now you can just rock up and still do all your work. And, obviously time zones are an issue, but still, it's amazing. I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, things have gotten so much easier for people who want to travel, especially the ones that want to build a business or work on a business while traveling, because technology has advanced so much that there are so many options out
Yeah,
there. It really just opens up an amazing amount of possibilities.
it
So it's
does.
more a matter of picking one and mastering one,
Right.
pretty
Which is
much.
always,
So you are in New Zealand. How long have you been in New Zealand?
well, on and off for about 7 years. Yeah,
Oh,
quite a
no.
while. Yeah.
That's cool. Kiwis are probably, if not the nicest people I've ever met. Maybe they're close. I don't know. They're neck and neck with Canadians, but like they're just friendly people. I've got some friends in New Zealand, and they're just amazing
Yeah,
people.
it's a
So,
wonderful. I mean, I do love the culture here a lot, and it's not like fake nice either. It's genuine, And I mean, not that nobody's ever fake, but it was really funny. My friends were visiting here a couple months ago from California. They live in California, and we were dropping them off at the airport, and I was like, oh well, somebody will stay here with the vehicle. There was literally no cars parked out in front of the drop off zone, so we're like, okay, well, but we should still have somebody here. And my friend Jeff goes, they'll probably send somebody out to wash the car for you. Like, don't worry about it. Because Kiwis are his perception is just like, whoa, everybody's so nice here. So yeah.
they genuinely are, though. It's when you live in places like LA, or I spent a lot of time in
Mhm.
Vegas. It
Mm,
almost it's I don't know. When you go back or you go someplace like that, or I go back to home to Minnesota or something, it took me 3, 4 days to adjust. Like, people are just genuinely nice,
yeah.
and you're like, what do you want? You get that, Vegas, LA, and New York, everybody's trying to get one over on you. So you're just in that
Yeah.
defensive mode all the time. But yeah, that's gotta be a cool place to live. I haven't visited New Zealand, but it's very high on my list.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a great combination of things, which I mean, I love being outdoors. I love hiking. And so I was mentioning to you, we're on the water here in the Tasman Bay is where I'm at. And we've got mountains to the west. We've got amazing water, like beautiful ocean, white sand beaches. And it's just, but I will say, like, for me, the quality of life in terms of being able to have great hikes within an hour that are so easy to get to and so fun is just such a huge draw to me. But when I was younger, I maybe would have been a little bit bored here. Not bored, but for this long, I think I was definitely still wanting to run quite a bit, even though,
Right.
obviously New Zealand is not the US, but Yeah, I think when I was younger, I lived in San Francisco and I loved it, being able to go to concerts and all that stuff. Not that you can't do that here. It's just that now I get more excited to go to the cities. I'm like, oh, we're gonna go to Wellington. Like it's really exciting, you know. Whereas like when I lived in San Francisco, I was kind of like, oh yeah, I guess we'll go see that big concert at the Fillmore on Monday night. Like you get kind of
Yeah.
this jaded. I did anyway.
Mhm.
So it's nice to be able to get excited again.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. It's a cool perspective. Now, okay, I got questions about Antarctica.
Yeah,
I
let's go
really
there.
do. So there's so many myths and rumors and all this other stuff concerning Antarctica, what's hidden down there, what their governments are keeping away from people, and where you can go, what you can't go, and it's just all that's been kind of fascinating to me. So what's your take on that from somebody who's been there? Are there no-go zones there?
Well, I mean, I think just out of common sense, there's definitely no-go zones in terms of do you want to die or live? Like, and so
Yeah,
that would
there's
be
that.
right. That would certainly be a no-go zone. I mean, I think anytime there's a place like this where not a lot of people have access to, you're going to get theories. You're going to get
Yeah.
people going, oh, maybe it's this, maybe, and honestly, like I said, I can't really, um, I don't really even know all the theories. I kind of like don't even look to be honest because I'm just like I don't even want to know. But no, I mean, in terms of like some of the things I've seen have been really hilariously wild, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, I guess that could be a thing, but not in my experience. So, I mean,
Right.
I was mostly at McMurdo Station. The U.S. operates the South Pole Station at South Pole, and we
Okay.
have flights going there, pretty much every day if we can in the summer. And then we have
Really?
traverses that go across the continent from McMurdo to the South Pole to take fuel. So they take big tractors with tracked wheel. You've probably seen this in Minnesota, actually, the big tracked tractors rather than wheels. And then
Hmm.
they have these huge fuel bladders that they fill up with fuel at McMurdo because we have a fuel tanker that comes to McMurdo. We're on the water, and they take those tractors down to South Pole to take the fuel down there for the winter. So that's how we basically keep Pole going year round. I mean, various other things too, obviously, but
Yeah.
fuel is a huge part of that. So that's like the Trans-Antarctic Highway or something like that. I think I've seen.
Yeah.
So it is a route that they do usually take year, like mostly the same year after year because it's more packed and stuff. But it's like once they get over these mountains, it's just 800 miles of plateau basically of just
Just
flat white.
nothing, huh?
Yeah, flat white.
Yeah.
So where I was at McMurdo was a little more dynamic because like we were on the water. We're on an island that's right next to the world's southernmost active volcano, which is called Mount Erebus. So we've got this
Okay.
big volcano in the background. We're on this very volcanic rock island, and then the permanent ice and temporary sea ice is kind of right. I mean, it's actually kind of an awesome spot for all of the things that we do down there. Um,
Yeah.
there's the permanent ice shelf, which is where we land all the planes, and then there's temporary sea ice that breaks out. So in the summer, we can bring in resupply vessels and so fuel, food, etc., and take trash out basically. So that's a big operation in January and February. Um, so yeah, like I said, without knowing exactly which theories there are, I can't really debunk or bunk any of them. But yeah, I mean, I don't really know. It's funny
Right.
because again, my experience is very much a working in a mining town kind of
Right.
experience.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know much about it. I don't put much credence one way or the other. I mean, I can get out my tinfoil hat and go into all of them, but it's like, you know, what does fascinate me, always fascinated me about Antarctica was Mount Vinson,
Oh, okay.
one of the seven summits, the highest mountains on each continent. Now,
Ah,
how
okay.
far is that from like where you are over the South Pole Station or where there's actual civilization? Is it quite a ways away from there?
I don't know. I'm just gonna look right now, actually.
Ah,
Here.
I'm fascinated with
North
mountain
part.
climbing, but I hate the cold, so it's something I'll sit and watch YouTube and do pretty much.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Hey, yeah. So then that's definitely a no go to Antarctica. If you, well, honestly though, I will say when I was considering going down, because I mean, you grew up in winter as well. Like
Hmm.
I was just my first reaction. I remember I was dating a guy who was really into. Okay, no. So yeah, Vincent is on the other side. It's on the South American side. So I was
Okay.
at basically it's called the Ross Sea and Ross Island, and then there's the Antarctic Peninsula, which is the one that you will take to get. Well, basically, you go from South America to get to that side of Antarctica, and
Okay.
that's usually going to be where more of the tourist stuff goes for a good reason because it's a lot. it's a higher latitude and more northern latitude, and so there's a lot more wildlife. It's a lot more dynamic. It's easier to get to. I think if you were to
Right.
take a ship from New Zealand to Antarctica, it takes a good week or so just to get down there on a ship, or maybe more. Actually, no, it's probably more. And then, but on the South American side, it's a little bit less, or they can go in different places, and there's just more to see down there, basically. So, I mean, we
Right.
did get tourist ships here and there, but not as much as like the peninsula side would. Yeah. So, um, yeah.
I looked into that briefly. There's, tours or whatever that go out of Argentina, I think,
Yes.
and go there.
Or
So
Chile.
but I don't,
Yeah.
yeah, Chile as well. Yeah, I always thought that would be fascinating. I think it'd be great. I don't think I'd like to spend a whole bunch of time there, but it's something that I'm going to do, if nothing else, just to say that I've done it, because there's not too many people you talk to that've been there. So,
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's interesting to see. I mean, I mean, I don't regret going or being there. I mean, to be honest, though, the things that I thought that I would, I guess, when I was deciding to go down there, I was thinking, yeah, like I said, I have nothing better to do. This seems like a good adventure. Why not? Right. At first, I was like, I don't want anything to do with the cold. I definitely didn't even see myself wintering. No way. I was like, that is so not my jam. And then once I got down there, you get to know the community is absolutely amazing. And this is kind of like a lot of travelers' communities, right? You meet these people who have maybe a different way of seeing the world, and they certainly have set their lives up to be not alternative necessarily, but they're not, living the life that maybe is prescribed or the template that people seem to ascribe to sometimes. So
right.
you just get a lot of really creative people, a lot of people who are mountaineers, who are they're really interested in all kinds of different adventures. And that part is also part of like what gets addictive, because it's just such an amazing community just kind of built in. And
Yeah.
I always miss that. And actually in New Zealand it's kind of great because we still get people coming through after their seasons and stopping in and visiting. And so I still get to, and now there's people that I never actually was down on the ice with that will come and see us and, and hang out, and we can still like have a good time and talk about the ice. But it's just, that part was something that I did not foresee at all. But yeah, that was also part of
Right.
what made it hard to leave, was you start to get into a community and you're just like, that you're not going to be able to recreate that type of community. Maybe
Right.
not,
That's
maybe
something
not
that'd be very
never.
unique.
Right. And so it's not that, like I said, it's not like you'll never be able to recreate it, but you won't be able to have it the same way. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you need to hold on to things, but it does make it harder to leave for sure.
Well, I can imagine. I can imagine. You start kind of developing a sense of familiarity and you get your tribe around you. So, did you have, outside of just living in a mining town during the dead of winter, did you have any cool experiences or adventures that you got into?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would say one of the things that I really loved about down there is how I mean, they're very, they encourage you to go hiking and exploring as much as we can kind of in the area. So there's one of my favorite things that we did. There's and you probably would have enjoyed this. So I mentioned Mount Erebus, which is a huge volcano, and there's a
Yeah.
huge uplift. It's kind of like Devil's Tower. Are you familiar with Devil's Tower in Wyoming? Which is, I
Yes.
think,
Yes.
the core of a volcano. This is actually, it's not exactly the same, but it's like that kind of up thrust of rock, basically. And it's called
Yeah.
Castle Rock. And you could go up there and climb that. And in the summer, of course, it's light 24 hours a day. So I think we were up there at like midnight or something. It was probably pretty dangerous, but no, it was fine, actually. We were taking precautions, but you walk up there and then there's these chains and you scramble up there, and then you've just got this amazing 360-degree view of the Ross Sea and the Royal Society Mountains and Mount Erebus. And it was just like, there's a lot
Wow.
of like, if I were in maybe search and rescue or one of these more adventurous jobs, I definitely would have done a little more out and about. I mean, for me, I was mostly in a town job, or I worked at the airfield a lot my first couple of seasons. So I did get to drive and do a lot of adventure that way, but it's more, driving adventure, which I actually would love.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so, but we did do these things called boondoggles. So basically, there's work that needs to be done. So, for example, they bury fuel caches in various locations, and they're just barrels of fuels that are marked, or there's a location that is known. So, if someone gets out there in an emergency and they need fuel, they can get it. So, what we do is go out to the different fuel caches and just check to make sure that the fuel is still good and that it's easy enough to get. So we dig it all out. So that's like that's your big exciting day, is like you get to go take a little bitty plane and go fly out and dig out some fuel cache. But it's great because you get out of town and you get to go experience different parts of the continent. Um, one of my other favorite
Sure.
boondoggles was the Erebus Tongue Glacier. So basically, it's a glacier that comes off of Mount Erebus, kind of. And we got to take snowmobiles out to the ice caves out there, and that
Oh,
was unbelievable. I mean, it was just the blue was indescribable, and you're just in these beautiful. It's kind of like Antelope Canyon in the U.S., where it's this beautiful, like undulating thing, but it's in ice. It's in snow and ice. So
yeah.
that was just mind blowing for me. There's a place called the
Sounds
Dry
amazing.
Valleys near McMurdo, which is basically the closest conditions that we can recreate on Earth to what we think to space. So it's very high, dry, and cold. And they do a
Mm.
lot of experiments on things that are going to be going to space out there. And that's a really outstanding area too. I've only kind of flown over that area, but I haven't gotten to actually really see a lot of it. But it's just beautiful what I have seen. So there's
Yeah.
definitely places around. Certain other jobs they would be out and about a lot more, especially on the
Right.
continent. But yeah, since I was mostly basic learner, I didn't really get to do as much of that, unfortunately.
Right. Are there people who just go there and hang out for a while, or is it everybody down there pretty much working?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So, I mean, some people would argue otherwise, but yes, everyone's down there to work. Yeah. So again, we might get some tourist boats in here and there, but they'll only be at McMurdo for maybe a couple hours because it's a working operation. There's a lot of safety stuff. I mean, I will say one of the things that I really appreciate about my experience down there is that it made me much more safety conscious in a high stakes way, right? So it's
Mm.
and much more okay with speaking up when I'm like not. I mean, not that it's like, oh, everybody, I'm like Miss Perfect Safety by any stretch. Like that's unsafe, but just noticing situations that I need to speak up about, and then getting comfortable with speaking up about it, because
Yeah.
frostbite's not a joke. All these things that can happen are no joke, and you have to help notice that for your teammates. And for me, when I was a team lead, really be able to say, look, I need you to wear your coat now. Like it's too cold for you to
Yeah.
be in that sweater or whatever. And you feel like kind of a weirdo, but it's also really important to take care of each other. And people are good about going, oh yeah, you're right. I should have thought of that or should
Yeah.
have been doing that.
Yeah. How cold does it, like in the summertime? You said it's daylight, and that's most of the activity down there, I imagine. What's the average temperature in the summertime?
I mean, we get up to freezing in the summer. We can get up to above a little bit above 32. Like sometimes
Really?
I think the highest I've ever been up, yeah, is probably a little bit over freezing. I would say the average is probably around 20, something like that, I would guess.
Okay.
So, not too cold, especially if you're from the northern places of the US.
Yeah.
Um, but we can definitely have weather spring up still in the summer. Like we have different conditions for weather. So condition 3 is everything normal and fine. It might be kind of snowy, but
Yeah.
it's nothing. Condition 2 is maybe visibility is decreasing, or maybe we've got extreme temperatures. So your visibility might be fine, but it's all of a sudden the temperatures drop. And then condition 1 is either it's really really cold, so we need to be more careful, and there's certain protocols in place for that, or there's zero visibility or very low visibility, and that's
Okay.
other protocols for that as well. So depending on if you're working, there were a lot more exciting things with condition 1 in particular when I was working at the airfield, because it's 15 miles from town to the airfield on these
Oh,
snow, like, so it's on this ice shelf and it's packed we pack the roads really tight snow. So in the summer when it gets warmer, it actually makes the driving a lot harder because the snow gets softer. And so we've
yeah.
got these big Ford E350 vans that have a lot of guts. Honestly, I love driving those things. And we also have some really special vehicles that have these big Terra tires. They're called Terra tires. They were built for in Canada actually, but they're like 5 foot tall tires, huge, wheels to get through the snow and everything. Um, and yeah, for day to day, for adventure, the shuttles department was definitely sometimes the place to be, because you'd be getting stuck, weather would pop up, there's all kinds of different things that might happen. And anytime you're dealing with any kind of airfield too, I think you're dealing with a lot of dynamic environment and dynamic situations where you've got to be supporting all kinds of different operations. So I enjoyed
Yeah.
that a lot. Actually, it was really fun.
Well, it sounds like an amazing experience, and one not too many people can lay claim to either. That's
Well,
awesome.
yeah, yeah, it was
So
fun, and I'm really glad I got to go.
I could hear about Antarctica all day, not a problem.
Eh,
But let's let's move on. Let's talk about your business coaching, because you work with a lot of different clients. Do you work with people specifically who are looking to kind of be mobile, digital nomad types or traveling entrepreneurs?
I mean, I definitely have had clients that do that. Yeah. So it depends. It's really funny. I feel like, we're told to niche, niche, niche. And I don't think niching is bad, right? I think it's good actually. But I have had I've had just a wide range of people who are like, I want to work with her. It's really funny to me sometimes, like what makes people come to work with me. But yes,
Yeah.
I've definitely had clients who, especially when we were first starting to work together, they were thinking about transitioning out of either their job or just being a permanent resident of a place, and
Yeah.
then our time together helped them with that. Just I mean, sometimes it's just nuts and bolts and logistics, but a lot of times it's mostly mindset. It's like, I mean, there's a lot of fear involved with any new endeavor, but especially something like that because it's identity based, right? Like, so if I identify as a smoker, for example, I'm
Right.
going to be thinking about when can I get my next cigarette? How do I get my next pack of cigarettes? I mean, I guess I don't know. Obviously, I'm not a smoker because I'm like, what will a smoker be
Yeah.
thinking about? But
What do they do?
basically, I'm thinking about the things that you'd be thinking about as a smoker. Like, should I get some more mints? I don't know. When you're somebody who's an athlete, right? You're thinking, okay, when I'm going to schedule my training times in, like, how am I going to do these things, right? But you have to have
Hmm.
that identity to start thinking like that. And I think that that's where any kind of pivot or transition like this, you're going to see people struggling because they're shifting from the identity of someone who's stationary or living a certain life or doing a certain thing into something that's maybe unknown or almost completely unknown to a lot of people. And so
Yeah.
it's not only scary, it's also a shift in how you think about yourself. And
Hmm.
that I think is probably the hardest part for most people. Does that make sense?
I bet. No, it makes perfect sense. It really reminds me of James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. That was
Right.
an example that he gave specifically. Like there's a big difference between, if you quit smoking and somebody offers you a cigarette and you say, "Hey, no, I'm trying to quit," or you say,
Right.
"No, thanks, I don't smoke."
Exactly.
There's a big
Exactly.
difference. So yeah, it's that same sort of thing, and that is, that's another. I agree with you 100% because I've been doing this for quite a while, traveling and living abroad and whatever. And I've talked to a lot of people who do it, and I've talked to a lot of people who tell me they want to do it. God, I wish I could do that. And it's usually not a matter of they can't.
Mm,
It's usually a matter of, like you said, mindset. They don't see themselves as that person. They see that they see it in me, or they see it in somebody else, but they don't see it in themselves. And I think that identity switch is a very key concept for a lot of people if they want to tackle more of a nomad style life.
yeah. And there's a lot of ways that we take on these new identities. I mean, honestly, shopping is one of the biggest ones, right? Like you're getting ready for a big trip and you're like, what kind of luggage do I need? Or like, gearing up basically. And that's totally cool. Like there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. It's just understanding that is all part of how you're creating a new construction of yourself and how you're creating that new identity.
Yeah, that's powerful. Right? And you're absolutely
Mm,
right. So you're talking about the athletes. Like first thing I touched down here, I was Googling gyms and oh
right.
shoot, I forgot my protein. So I got to find, I got to get a small thing of protein to get through the week, because I'm just going to be in Houston for a week. But
Yeah.
okay, I had to find the Airbnb near the VA hospital because I'm going to get my annual labs and get my shoulder taken a look at and all that. And so I got Airbnb close, and then I started looking for gyms around and supplement stores.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
building that was one of the hardest. Like I said, when I quit my job as a teacher to go do this adventure travel bus driving, I mean, I just heard so many people. Like, I mean, so many people were just like, "What are you doing? You have a great job. You're." I mean, I was 24, 25. I wasn't that ill, and it's like, I don't know. I'm really glad that I had the courage to just go. I don't know where this is gonna lead me, and I'm definitely not gonna make a lot of money at it. But traveling is really important to me, and I identified as a traveler, as an explorer, as somebody who really went out and did that kind of thing. And I think that for a lot of people, we get that beaten out of us, and it's really sad, and it makes me really. I guess in some ways, it makes everybody who kind of does this feel a little bit like a rebel. Not everyone, but for me, I think that has been the case um, of you're impractical, you're gonna be poor, all these kinds of like narratives that we get told either consciously or unconsciously by people who care, who love us, who care, but they just don't have that identity of someone who's willing to try this kind of thing. They might be more adventurous in other parts of their life, and that's cool. But,
Right.
or, you know, again, different ways, different people challenge themselves in different ways, and that's totally fine. But for whatever reason, I just found that, especially at that time for me, people were really like, I had a lot of people saying things like, "Oh, are you sure you want to leave?" Or like, you know, and it was hilarious.
And
And then after a while, and it was like, "Oh yeah, that's just what Casa does." Then it's become
yep.
more people asking me more how to do it and that kind of thing. But at first, it was a lot of, "What are you thinking?"
Yeah. The biggest question I think I got was why?
Mm,
Why? Like, I remember when I sold my house, sold everything, gave away everything. I packed a couple suitcases, my dog in the car, and I drove down through Mexico. And
nice.
like, why would you want to do that?
People are so
I'm
scared
like,
of Mexico too, and I love Mexico. And it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you read all the stuff about TJ and, you know, uh,
yeah,
Not Nogales, but yeah, the border town in Texas. Gosh, I can't remember
yeah.
now. But it's
Uh,
like, of course you're
Juarez.
gonna get freaked out. That's totally it's terrifying. But yes, Juarez, that's what it is. My experience of Mexico has been wonderful. Like, I mean, I'm not saying every single experience has been perfect there by any stretch, but I absolutely love Mexico. And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, there's just people can use stories for, I mean, what we were talking about with Antarctica too. Like, they use stories based on what they've experienced either through the news or whatever, or just because they're afraid, it just reinforces that identity of, oh, I don't go to Mexico, or
Yeah.
I don't do this thing, because we want to be reinforcing those identities for ourselves, I think.
It's really tough to let go of those identities, especially if they're very, very well ingrained.
Mm,
I I remember I went, what was it, last year, at the beginning of the year, I went back home to Minnesota to spend, some time with the family, especially parents get a little bit older. So I was like, I want to spend some good time up there. So I think I spent 2 months. And I was at
nice.
my buddy's house. And he's about the same age I am. His girlfriend's the same age. Um, and she's like, oh, how long are you in town for? I'm like, oh, I'll be leaving here, in such and such time, whatever. Oh, where are you going then? Going, and I was like, well, not exactly sure. I'm probably going to go to Spain for a little while and then maybe Abu Dhabi and then on to Thailand and then who knows. But that's kind of the tentative plan right now. The look on her face, you would have think that somebody just slapped her mother. Like,
Mm,
she was like, why would you want to do that?
right.
I was like, kind of, it's like, I couldn't tell if she was being serious or just kind of like, oh, like kind of joking around with me, but she was dead
Yeah.
serious. And then she was like,
Mm.
I don't know why, that just doesn't make any sense. She's like, I don't go more than 10 miles outside this town. This is where I was born. This is where I was raised, and I don't need to go anywhere else. Well, hey, you know what? No judgment. Like, you live your life however you want to live, but it's so foreign to me. Well, it's just as foreign as I am to her. It's just like I can't comprehend that, and she couldn't comprehend like getting on a plane and just going with no anywhere with no
Right.
return ticket. It was just
Yeah.
it almost caused
Well,
a,
and a
a
lot of,
physical reaction.
right. Some people are just like, oh, like, what is this? I mean, I would say a lot. When I work with my clients, and this is in group coaching as well, a lot of this I think comes down to values conflicts. So, my top value is freedom, right? Like, I love to feel free, and that can be different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, I'm just off running around free all the time. But, it shows up in different things. So I would say my highest one is freedom. My second highest one is probably well-being. And so when you understand what your highest values are, it makes it easier to feel great about your decisions, and it actually gives you a lot of energy, I think, too. But I think that for some people, either they don't understand, or they don't understand that that's what's driving that. So I mean, my example that I always use is that I love my brother dearly. We are he's awesome. He's one of my favorite people. But when we were younger, we used to get in a lot of arguments that were pretty, well, pointless, honestly. And
They're kids.
partly because we had values conflicts, and I didn't really realize this at the time, but I realized it later on. So for example, with him, I think one of his highest values, and I don't know if you would agree, but me looking at it from the outside, one of his highest values is probably loyalty or stability, something like that. And so my highest
Hmm.
value of freedom was in direct conflict with that value for him. So everything that I was doing that seemed really unstable or unsafe, or um not with align with it, that value is, he was just like, what are you doing? This is so
Yeah.
not, like, it's not a good idea. Whereas I saw him doing things that were very much in alignment with probably his top value of stability, and that kind of thing. or structure, maybe actually I love
Yeah.
structure, but the way that I was seeing him, and I would get triggered because I'm thinking, oh, he's judging me. He thinks I'm just a flaky hippie or whatever. And so,
Right.
that was where the source of a lot of conflict. And then when I finally realized, like, wait, this is literally just about our values. It's not about like who's right or wrong. And then of course you get older, you don't feel like you have to argue with everybody all the time either, but that's a whole
Yeah.
other story. Um, then it made our relationship a lot better because I think both of us were just like, oh, well, that's their value. Doesn't matter. Like, cool, good for you. Like, do your thing.
Right.
And we weren't trying to convince each other that the other one was right or that this was the better way to
Yeah.
do it. And I think that that's part of where those conversations come from. To this day, I still see a lot of conversations around that kind of thing. And I mean, I'm certainly open to having those conversations, but with that understanding and making that clear to the other person of like, yeah, this
Yeah.
is my highest value. And, it doesn't even matter why it's my highest value. I don't even really know or care, to be honest, but I just know that it is.
Hmm.
So it's oranges and apples, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And as long as people can be self-aware enough to realize it's a value thing, it's not a right or wrong thing.
Yeah.
That's where
Yeah.
there should be no conflict there. You have your values, I have mine, as long as your values don't involve hurting other people or
Right.
stuff like that, then knock yourself out. I don't care. I'm gonna live my
Yeah.
life the way I want, and I don't want people telling me how to live my life. That's where the
Right.
freedom comes in for me too. For me, it was always fitness, travel, freedom.
Nice. Yeah.
That was it.
So, yeah.
That was it. So,
And,
what
and,
was
and
your?
yeah.
Well, I was gonna say you were kind of heading down that road of kind of stability with the
Hmm.
grade school teacher job. What was your mindset like? Obviously, you want to travel, and I kind of get the background. I know it, but what was your mindset like? Was it difficult for you to
To
cut that
make that
cord and go do
decision.
something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. Because I mean, well, first of all, I was afraid, I mean, financially. So, I mean, I mentioned I grew up poor. So I like to have a certain level of safety net, right? Like I just, and I think everybody does. Nobody's thinking, "Ooh, I can't wait to spend my last $20." But that part was always the scariest for me was how am I going to support myself? Like how am I going to do this in a way that's going to be sustainable or, not, that I actually can do it, right? Because if you don't have any money, it makes it pretty hard to go do stuff. And so that was always a big challenge for me. And thinking about, well, how much do I need? All of that kind of stuff was really scary. The stability of having that paycheck coming in I mean, I got used to not having that many years ago, but it's still something that I'm kind of like, that would be kind of nice. But it's
Yeah.
not something tempting enough to actually do that. But that is a big thing for some people. And so like with certain clients, in particular, they'll be like, oh, I want to, and I'm like, just make sure that you do have, because it's basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like we have to take care of that bottom part of the pyramid of safety and security first. And then we can
Yep.
kind of come up the pyramid and get that self-actualization basically at the top. So,
Right.
for me, that was the hardest part. And I think that the thing that was hard about it though was the narratives I was giving myself. So the stories that I was saying, oh, well, I got to have this much, which is not necessarily wrong. But I have to have a job that will guarantee me this much. Well, then I got over to Prague and I was like, oh, I hate this TEFL job. I'm going to go be an au pair. And I actually made probably about the same amount of money and I liked the work a lot more. I just didn't
Yep.
know that. I didn't know that you could just show up somewhere and figure it out. Like I was like, oh, I was really freaked out about that. So that was a big part of it too, was kind of figuring out how to make sure that I had that system in place. I mean, the scary giving up my apartment and things like that was not hard. Actually, I didn't feel like that was that hard
No.
because, um, I don't know, it felt exciting. I put stuff in storage, gave a bunch of stuff away. We always joke on the ice where it's like, where's your storage unit? Because most of us don't have, permanent homes. We'll just be traveling when we're off season. And so, yeah, it was that part wasn't as scary for me. And then it got obviously easier the longer I did it too.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it was like trusting, being able to trust. And that's something that I deal with a lot of my clients too, because building self-trust for self-leadership. So, I mean, I do leadership coaching, but I'm also like, we all have to lead ourselves. And this is the thing that feels very, very scary sometimes because it's much easier to just follow somebody else sometimes. And
Right.
even when you're leading yourself to go find your protein, for example, I know that's
Mhm.
kind of a weird way of thinking about this type of activity, but I really do see it that way as like when you choose to lead yourself versus passively accept what whatever template society has given you, or the thing that seems practical. I mean, I'm doing air quotes around practical. um, it takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of self-trust. It takes a lot of trust in your smarts and your ability to manage challenging situations. And that does take a little bit of practice, I would say. So, when I was teaching, I kind of had to do that a lot because I was basically like a day or two ahead of the students,
Right.
which is really cool to admit now. But I mean, it's true. I mean, I really was like, what should I teach this week? Like, no, I'm just kidding. I had like a higher level, but I was like, what are we
Yeah.
going to do this week?
You had the
So
macro. You had the overview.
yeah, but it got me a little more comfortable with you figure it out as you go. And I think that there's so many people that think they have to have everything figured out before they go or before they start a thing. And in my experience, that's not true
You
at all,
don't.
actually. You need to have enough to go, and then you better just get going, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what advice you had for somebody who is considering changing, making a really big change like that. And, from, what a regular 9 to 5 or whatever, and becoming a nomad or travel, whatever you want to call it. But I think you just answered it.
Get up and do it.
Honestly. Get up and do it. Yeah, you don't want to be completely irresponsible and go someplace with absolutely no money. But it's like they say with everything else, the timing's never going to be exactly right.
No, that's so true. And I would say baby steps too. Like, so that's something that I always focus on, especially with my clients too, is like, do it in baby steps. There's going to be a lot of baby steps that lead to like a big push. And then there's more baby steps because people think it's just got to be this whole like takeoff launch kind of thing. Yeah, there's some parts like when you're getting on the plane or whatever. Yeah, that feels like that for sure. But mostly it's going to be baby steps. It's going to be getting the right visa. It's going to be paperwork, more paperwork than you think. All of
Hmm.
those kinds of things are baby steps. So if you just start to break it down, that's Atomic Habits again. Breaking it down into baby steps is probably the best advice I would give. Of like, I used to go to this travel store in San Francisco when I lived there. I loved it. It was called Get Lost. It was so amazing. Anyway, that was like my Sunday afternoon thing to do. And I would go and I would look at different books. And so, yes, I was researching, but then I would start, trying like new things and setting up little trips to different places and stuff like that. So even if you just start doing that, or if there's a sabbatical option for your job where you could be like remote for 2 or 3 months and you start to do that, there's some really great and actually this was a great thing for one of my clients. There's some companies that will help you uh go as a full-time nomad. I think she wasn't super delighted with this company at the end, but I think it was a good way to get her into it. And basically they have groups that go from, let's say they're in Buenos Aires for a month or so, and it's like the same group of people, and then they move on to Lima or something like this. And so there's like different
Okay.
amounts of time that you can do, how slow you want to do it. The nice thing about that is that there's other people who are doing it that you can socialize with.
Right.
So anyway, that can be a really great option for people if they're just overwhelmed with the logistics, because sometimes it can be very logistically challenging, and just to get your toes wet. And then after she did that
Mhm.
experience, I think she was with them for 4 or 5 months. After she did that experience, then she went to Korea. Then she did it all on her own, and she felt like she had enough competence to build that confidence to do it on her own. So that was a really good stepping stone for her. Again, it depends on your budget and your goals and all of those kinds of things, but there are absolutely
Right.
options for dipping your toes in. And she said that a lot of the people that she was doing that with actually were working full-time jobs. They were just remote. And especially with Latin
Yeah.
America, the time zones totally match, like not totally, but they're relatively easy to match up. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that could be a
It's
really
not
great
like
option for a
Asia
lot of
or
people.
New Zealand.
Right.
Those time
I
zones
mean,
are
actually, I'm kind of
those
lucky
times.
here because I'm only like 5 hours from the west coast of from California. So a lot of my clients are
Sure.
American because I'm a day ahead, but
Hmm.
not that far behind time wise. So yeah, you got to think about that if you're going to be working remotely for sure. But there's a lot of jobs you can do that are not remote. Like there's other things that you can do. Um, for me, supporting myself was important, but other people, if you go to a really cheap place and you're living on $1,000 a month, like that's totally doable, right? Like
It's so
you don't need
doable.
to have a lot of money saved to do that.
It is a culture shock because I'm gonna be here for a week, got my Airbnb, went to the grocery store, got just a light week's worth of food. It was $200 and my
Yeah.
cart wasn't full.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow. I mean, where I'm at in Mexico, where I'm staying at currently, it's not super cheap. It's certainly not like, um, go to Nicaragua or Colombia or Vietnam or something like that.
Hmm.
But it's still a world apart from the US in terms of basic cost of living. 'Cause I was like,
Yes.
I had to do some stuff in the card. I'm like, okay, here's some this, here's some this. And then I was like, he's ringing it up and I'm watching it go up. I'm like, what the hell? Like, I didn't get anything. It was $200.
Well, and
It's
there's a really
insane.
interesting book that I read kind of in my early 20s that really affected me a lot. And it was called Your Money or Your Life. And it's basically the premise of it is if somebody, was sticking you up and robbing you and they said your money or your life, what are we going to give them?
Mhm.
Hopefully our money, right? Most people. I mean, it
Yep.
depends on the situation, right? But their point was in this book was how much time, how much of your life are you giving up for costuming, which what I mean by that is, wearing a certain
Mm.
type of clothing so that you can look professional at work, commuting, lunches out, any of these things that are associated with your job. And he's like, if you really figure out your hourly wage based on all of that stuff, you would be shocked at how low it is. Because if you really
Yeah.
factor in all the commuting time, all of that other stuff, you're getting like 4 hours of your life to yourself a day, if that. And usually you're exhausted by the time that that's there too. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
what do you want to give up? And I'm not saying that you can't have both. You can have a money and a life,
Well, sure.
but it
Of
really
course.
did change my perspective on a lot of that stuff of like, I am never going to be somebody who is going to slog through a job that I hate. Um, to pay a mortgage. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
again, for me, that's not my highest value is freedom. So I'm not saying that mortgages aren't important to a lot of people, but that has never, ever, ever been something that I was like, oh, it's worth it. Yeah, I will spend a lot of my life working on that. Like it just
Yeah.
never has been that way for me. So
Yeah.
again, I'm not condemning anybody that is a value for them. It's just that my life is more important to me. And,
Right.
my father got sick when he was pretty young. He was 35 and his kidneys failed. And I think that's also part of that experience for me has been him being like, look, you don't have time to mess around. Like, go out and do the things that you want to do now.
Mm-hmm. Get it
And that
done.
has been challenging, but sometimes I go, oh man, I really got to get it together with certain
Yeah.
things. But mostly I'm like, I'm really glad that I took that on at that age.
Yeah. No, it's a great move. And when you start looking at the finance of it, people, it always struck me as weird. Like I spent last year pretty much in Southeast Asia. People are like, oh, I wish I was rich like you. I could just travel around and do this. And then I'm like, well, I'm not broke, but this doesn't cost me a lot of money. You know,
Right.
a flight from Chiang Mai to Ho Chi Minh City was like $59.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, and you could buy. It's insane how far your dollar will go. And if you're the U.S., obviously Uncle Sam wants his taxes. There are so many things
Mhm.
you can do legally to offset your taxes. You can get the first 120,000 a year, more or less, tax free. And
Yeah.
it doesn't take that much money, a couple grand, to set up that structure.
Right.
And if you look at it, if you live, especially in one of the higher tax states, New York, California, one of those places, Illinois, you are working 6 months out of the year to pay taxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
6 months
Unfortunately.
of your work out of every 12 months is going right to the government.
Yeah.
And I don't know, everybody, a lot of people are good with that. That hurts. It
Yeah.
hurts me someplace really, really deep, and I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do it. Obviously, you got to pay your taxes. You got to do it right, but there are ways to do it in a way so you can minimize your tax
I,
liability,
yeah. Yeah.
and you can end up working a lot less and actually taking home a lot more,
Yeah. And
which is
and
crazy.
the sacrifice that you make is that you're not in the US full time, right? Like that, and that's okay. Like I said, that
Is
depends
that a
on what people
sacrifice?
want. I know, right? For some people it is. Like I said, if they want to be really close to their family. I mean, I haven't been back to Montana in a long time, longer than I'm cared to. I think it's been like 8 years. It's been way too long. So there is that factor, right? Like, and I think that I would be doing people a disservice not to mention that can be challenging, obviously, like to be so far away from your family. But I mean, especially with video calls, all these kinds of things. I mean, I talk to my sister almost every day, and it's
Yeah.
one of those things where it is challenging, but I think for me, it's been worth it. But yeah, that's definitely something to consider for people. but yeah, exactly. Where do you want your life energy to go, to get really over the top with it? But it's true. It's like, we get one. What do we want to make it come out as? How do we want to do it?
Right. It's not a dress rehearsal. You
No.
got to figure out what you really want. And, that's something that inevitably comes up in just about every conversation I have with people who've kind of broken free out of the regular societal norms is many times it takes some sort of event for people to be like, oh shit,
Mm,
I'm putting off what I really want to do, working a job I hate to support stuff I don't need. And it, like one woman I talked to, she got cancer. She beat it, but that was her wake up call. For
yeah.
me, I mean, I traveled around a lot, but mostly in the US, and I was in the military, and so I was all around, but I always wanted to go live abroad, but I couldn't for this reason and that reason, all these different reasons that we come up with.
So is
And I had a really successful real estate business. It was kind of the golden handcuffs. And then when I lost everything, that was like, first it was horrible. And then I was like, well, maybe it's a blessing in disguise because now I'm not locked in anywhere.
yeah.
So, a lot of times, unfortunately, it takes that. But no, that's awesome. Any last words for somebody who is considering getting out, living abroad, or digital nomading around for a little bit?
I mean, I'm clearly biased, obviously, but I'm like, do it.
That's
Please
why
do
we're
it. Like,
here.
I mean, I guess especially if it's something, because you don't have to do it forever. That's the other thing. People think, oh, well, if I go overseas, it's like, dude, you could do it for a couple of months. It doesn't, if you don't like it, then go back and do what you were doing before.
Yeah,
Whatever. It's not a
yeah.
big deal. I
You
think
can do it
people
for a
just
couple
get like,
weeks.
yeah,
Who
it's like, oh, I
cares?
put all this effort into it. You know what? Yeah, that happens. Now
Yeah.
you don't
Go
like,
back.
now you don't want to do it. And that is very valuable information too. So I think, like
Yeah.
I said, the risks are far outweighed by the rewards, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I would always encourage people to at least start taking those baby steps towards making something happen. It doesn't have to be a certain way or certain look a certain way. But yeah, I would
Whatever
definitely
speaks to
say,
their soul.
yeah. And I think that it's important to just build that self awareness too. And I think that that's actually one of the biggest things about traveling and business as well for me has been helping me get to know myself better, right? And not to be like a navel gazer, but to be somebody who is really thinking about, well, what do I want and why do I want it,
Yeah.
rather than just kind of mindlessly putting one foot in front of the other. One of my clients said, making dinner and surviving. Like we want to be able to thrive if possible. And I think that whatever that looks like, it could be travel, it could be whatever. But just making sure that you're actually building that awareness is something that's so important to me. So I encourage you to do that, however that looks.
I would agree. And I find myself wondering how many people actually sit down with themselves and get clear on what they want, especially after they get caught up in life.
Yes.
You know,
And
I
I've
wonder,
had sessions where it was like we'd be like hour. Usually my sessions are 2 hours, which we have a break in the middle. But we'd be like almost done with the session, and finally it would come out. Finally they'd admit it, or finally they'll go, "Oh my god, it's this!" Like they just didn't realize. And but a lot of times they just don't want to admit it. Like it feels too scary to
yeah,
say, and that's okay.
yeah, yeah.
So
That's all right. That's all right. But as long as you get to it. So,
yeah,
well, Casa, I really, really appreciate you coming on the show. That was amazing.
that's
I love
great
the
to be here.
stories. I
Thank
love
you,
the
Steve.
insight. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.